Again, this is our last presentation of the day. So, Awâsis is a Nichif Ojikri Métis spoken word artist, writer, and community organizer, currently helping to cultivate resistance to Enbridge Line 9, the tar sands pipeline that runs through Anishinaabe, Haudenosaunee, Lenape, and Nichif territories in so-called Ontario. My apologies again. And so, Awâsis, you are free to take it away.
All right. Bonjour. Sâkihitowin Awâsis Tushmikashon, Pegosken Tapnaskadeo Meguan Saga, Nichif Odapea Mizawag, Dashkin Zibi Nawigan, Tiangairo Wiyiwak. So I just introduced myself in my language, the Michif language, and just said my Métis name is Sâkihitowin Awâsis, or Awâsis. My English or GST name is Courtney, and I currently live in Antler River or London, Ontario. I'm from Niagara, and yeah, just wanted to say thank you to the organizers and everyone listening in from all over the place. It's an honor to be speaking to you today. And Michael, I really loved your Line 9 sign in the back. That's great. So just to start, as you can probably see here with the image in front of us, I just wanted to give a brief overview of colonization and the impacts this has on Indigenous ways of being, so we're all kind of on the same page. So the symbol there you see of the circle with the 4 quadrants, I don't know how familiar people are with that symbol, but it's the medicine wheel, one of them, and it's used as a healing tool. So this isn't traditional to all Indigenous nations. This particular one is for the Anishinaabe, and you see it in different nations used with different colors. And like I said, in some nations don't use it at all, but have picked it up as a healing tool because we're all part of this circle. It represents many different things, different spirit animals, times of year, the seasons, passing of time, the 4 sacred medicines. So we're going to look at it today as the passing of time. And so starting in the top right corner, we have pre-contact, what we had prior to colonization. Women had a respected role in our communities. They're the backbone of our families and nations. The spiritual foundation was core to Native beliefs, which I'll expand on more later. We had strong, healthy families. Everyone had respected roles in our communities, balanced roles between women, men, and two spirits. And women were seen as life givers, the center of our nations. We hear that a lot. And the main teachers in preparing youth for the future survival. So upon contact, what happened? We had the residential school system and the reserve system were developed under the Indian Act. This really destroyed our family structures, our spiritual beliefs, languages, cultures. These children were literally stolen off their front lawns and forced to go to these schools. Many died at the schools from malnourishment. Many died trying to run away back to their families. And within these schools was the systemic denial of our languages and our cultures. It was an intentional act of cultural genocide. And through the imposition of a patriarchal system, our women lost respect, basically. This was part of our disruption of the spiritual foundations of our family and the denial of our traditional roles in our communities. And like I said, European values really imposed the male-dominated society on us. So we can see what that looks like. I just made a little flow chart here. So really the hierarchy that was imposed on us was put European men at the top, followed by European women, Native men, Native women, and then two spirits. So this was not traditional to us at all. And I highlighted the European men there at the top because really the society that was formed upon contact centered around not only the narratives of European men, but the resources and rights of European men as well. Everyone gained, women in Two-Spirits gained access to the wage labor force and property by what was seen as fulfilling or becoming basically full humans in reflection of European men and what that means. So back to this. After this hierarchy was established on this land, we saw it actually imposed on and enforced in our communities. So those male-dominated values broke down our traditional family structures. And we see this with the high levels of violence in our communities, the over 800 missing and murdered Indigenous women, and high levels of sexual abuse. And really the Indian Act facilitated all this, and the dispossession of our people, as well as the theft of our lands. And I just want to stress that that act is still in place today. It's really an apartheid system to have a complete set of legislature that applies to a certain group of people based on ethnicity. So I will get back to the future later, but basically what I wanted to drive home there is that this process of colonization imposed ways of being and governance on us that wasn't traditional. And as well, one of the impacts of colonization that kind of stemmed from the residential school system was the 60s scoop, where tens of thousands of children in the 60s and 70s through to the 80s, Native children, were taken from their families and put in white homes, again, just furthering this colonial agenda of assimilation and genocide. And this continues today. We are starting to hear it called the Millennium Scoop. And really the number of children Native children in institutionalized care today actually exceeds the amount of children that were in residential schools at the height of that system. So that's very, very alarming. And so what we saw with this colonial process is really a process of dehumanization and dispiriting, stripping us of our spiritual beliefs. And this Indian Act system, residential school system, is, in my opinion, the same colonial system that oppresses animals and the earth today. So this is how this violence against Indigenous families and nations is linked to violence against animals and the earth. So I want to explore this connection a little more, really in terms of captivity, because it might be a surprise to some people that during early reservation times, Native people actually were restricted to leave the reserve. We actually needed a permit, so that's what I just brought up here. And so this one says, James Smith, who is actually a chief, is permitted to leave reserve, to go to Battleford, just to visit his daughter. As simple as that. And you'll see these as well with like the reason being to hunt big game or anything else, right? So as you can imagine, if you are captive on a reserve that may not even be on your traditional territories due to dispossession, not only may you not be familiar with the local food systems, but you also don't have access to your traditional food sources due to being confined in a limited land base like that. So I don't know how familiar people are with the term environmental racism, but basically it means that some bodies and people are valued more than others. Indigenous people and people of color disproportionately face health impacts and pollutants in their environment, that kind of thing. And essentially were denied the right to live healthy, long, and meaningful lives. Just a little stat, in Canada, the rates of disease among First Nations and Inuit groups are 5 times higher than the country's average. So that just illustrates how disproportionate that is. And in a lot of ways, I haven't heard this term before. I might just be making it up, but I feel like there's also a kind of environmental speciesism that is going on in the same way. For instance, in the area of the tar sands, we don't expect European people or white people to live there, but it's perfectly acceptable for First Nations and wildlife to be living on the front lines like that. So I'm just trying to broaden that term to also include animal beings. So just to connect this, the captivity on reserves during early times there, to this disconnect from traditional food systems, when we were no longer able to move on our territories to access food, we were given by the colonial state what has become known as the 5 white gifts. So these were resources brought to Indigenous nations by the settler nation, and it consisted of sugar, salt, flour, milk, and lard. So they're all white. And even foods that are thought of as traditional to our cultures today are a product of these 5 white gifts, because we're denied access to any other foods for so long, or very few. For example, bannock or fried bread. You see that a lot of powwows, that kind of thing, and it's made of these gifts that aren't traditional to our cultures at all. So this diet really extends the oppression of Native people, and has resulted in many serious health impacts, such as increase in obesity, diabetes, gallstones. But this type of colonization that imposes colonial food systems on us actually continues today. In many areas, because of this environmental racism, we can no longer harvest the food medicines or eat the animals in the area because of overwhelming levels of pollutants. We've eroded and completely destroyed our relationship and ability to connect to the natural world in a meaningful way. So for an example, is a neighboring nation to where I live right now, Aamjiwnaang First Nation. They are surrounded on 3 sides by what is known as Chemical Valley. So intense petrochemical industry. It's absolutely disgusting. I couldn't stress that enough. But there was recently a study done in the area where cedar, one of the 4 sacred medicines on that medicine wheel there, actually can't be used for ceremonies anymore due to the high mercury levels. And that just tears my heart apart. I mean, our ancestors would definitely not know what to do. They wouldn't even recognize the environment, I don't think. So when environments are destroyed or contaminated, this affects the food they can provide, obviously. And like I alluded to before, environmental destruction in this way is a consequence of Western society's detachment from our food and medicine systems. But I think it also detaches animals from their food systems in a lot of ways. So captivity, like a dairy or a farm, for instance, it operates in the same way that a reserve did early on. So there's an elder who facilitates the moon ceremonies I go to, Alva Jameson. She's of the Cayuga Nation. And I've heard her kind of tell this story a few times now, but she basically explains that when she uses cows as an example, when they are held captive in a fenced-in area, they don't have the ability to, or they don't have the choice to eat what is medicine for them because they're restricted. So what ends up happening is when they don't have that freedom to move where they like and find those medicines for themselves, they also experience increased sickness, much like we've seen through colonial history with Indigenous peoples. So in turn, because when people eat those animals, they're in turn harming themselves, and it's just moving up the food chain. So not only have humans, but all animals, we've all lost our direct relationship with the world around us, and are really given a false choice. So what I wanted to do with this presentation is really provide reasons to expand the scope of animal rights mobilizing to an anti-colonial framework, so that it includes understandings of diverse different kinds of relationships and responsibilities, and is basically strengthened by that. So what do I mean by a narrow animal rights framework? Basically one that is focused on rights as something that can be given to animals as opposed from originating from them, and is solely focused on that. It doesn't include how we are connected to our environment and each other. So some risks, I think, of a narrow animal rights framework is that I don't think an animal can really truly be liberated and lead a meaningful life in a toxic environment. It prevents them from thriving, much like it does humans. And when the scope of animal rights is so narrow, it really can invisibilize or override the environmental and health concerns of humans. So an example that some of you might be familiar with is of the cultural appropriation involved in eating quinoa. So quinoa has actually been long harvested by indigenous peoples in southern countries, specifically Bolivia. And it's only been very recently, in the last maybe 5 years, that it's intensely grown in popularity in the Western world. And so what we need to be aware of is, because of this popularity, Bolivians can actually no longer afford this grain due to the rising prices here. And like when I reflect on this, I think about how important wild rice, manomen, is in our ceremonies here, and how quinoa likely has a similar role in the spiritual life of the indigenous peoples of the South. And there's a few things that really bug me about this. Not only is that mass demand resulting in what was extremely diverse types of quinoa, it's turning that into a quinoa monoculture, which has a whole set of impacts on the environment and animals. But the lack of access indigenous peoples there have to this traditional food is also due to the fact that the modern or Western diets are easily pushed on them. And as I kind of went over with the 5 white gifts here, this has devastating impacts on health. So I think that a animal or rights framework or vegetarian, vegan ethics that is rooted in an anti-colonial framework would be able to respond to this issue that arises in our developing of ethical diets, in a meaningful way. Because if we had the same responsibility to humans and Indigenous people as we strive to have to animals, we would recognize that we need to use or eat things that are uphold those responsibilities. So other responsibilities that I believe I have to other life forms, they portray animals as our family in traditional understandings. They're our brothers, our sisters, our relatives, and women are the center of our nation. So as you can see, that's in stark contrast to the hierarchy I had up before. You could just picture that animals would probably even be below two spirits on that list. But the way that a lot of our traditional understandings operate is instead of a linear hierarchy like this, we all are part of the circle. Another responsibility that we have is with all our actions every day to be thinking about 7 generations before us, but also after us. So what our ancestors did informs our actions today, as well as what we can do for the future generations. And one way we can do this is by gathering and eating only what's needed and acting to protect that food biodiversity. Another responsibility for to take the life of an animal, we are supposed to ask the animal's consent and really thank the spirit of the animal for sacrificing its life for us as food by laying down tobacco. So, of course, this relationship dynamic is open to the possibility of the animal refusing. So this is because animals, like humans, have inherent rights. So my inherent rights include the meaning of my spirit name and the responsibilities that entails, the responsibilities of my clan, the Kere clan, which is to take care of the river and the waterways, as well as my nation. I didn't say this earlier, but when I introduced myself in my language, Odape'emizuwag, which is what the Michif call ourselves, actually means the people who govern themselves. So a large responsibility of my nation is to uphold that traditional governance structure. But just like Indigenous peoples' inherent rights, animals' inherent rights were really eroded and even lost as a result of colonization. But human and animal life is actually on a continuum, spiritually and physically, which frames humans and other animals as having personhood and self-determination, which goes back to that idea of their ability to consent to being eaten or not. So animals have independent life, their own purpose, their own relationships with the Great Spirit, and like the take home is they're not made for food. They're not a resource. They're our family. And the animal consent is required. So overfishing, overhunting, captivity, industrial farming, wholesale destruction of habitat certainly give animals a reason to refuse to sacrifice themselves. And these conditions do not fulfill our responsibilities as people of the earth to protect the land and our ecological relations. So animals can refuse to be sacrificed in certain ways. And given the state of the world, I feel like this is happening more and more. That being said, I do believe that animals can still agree to be sacrificed if approached in respectful ways. Our ancestors did use animals in ceremonies and continue to do so. However, these relatives, they weren't exploited, they weren't oppressed, but honored through song and ceremony. We weren't eating meat 3 meals a day, you know. Group hunting, their could be half a dozen to a dozen people that would really only be taking home a deer or two. I know a lot of people are going to disagree with this. I'm prepared for that. But I think that it's important for decolonization and Indigenous resurgence to have an important role in movements for animal liberation, because it really transforms how we see our responsibilities as settlers, as Indigenous people, as mixed people, to each other and the earth. And upholding treaty relations as well, which I could totally go on another rant, but I think I'm already over time. So I just wanted to stress moving forward that we're all part of that medicine wheel, dependent on each other, all living beings are, and we're all responsible for helping each other on our healing journey, which is a transformative process that intertwines human and animal liberation. And we really, in order to survive, need to reconnect with nature in this intimate way that's focused on dependence, not domination. And in a lot of ways, animal rights activists can risk reproducing colonial power dynamics in their organizing. For instance, instead of protesting the tar sands or pipeline projects that will accommodate their expansion, some activists take the time and energy to protest traditional Haudenosaunee or Indigenous hunts. So I just wanted to clarify a little bit, since these hunts aren't about population control. It's not about the hunters servicing the environment or by killing animals. The hunters see themselves as receiving a service from that deer, which has given their consent to support their traditional values and ways of life that were sustainable and healthy and provided nourishment for our spirits prior to colonization. So in this way, animal rights organizing can actually be used as a tactic for maintaining white supremacy when spiritual protocols and cultural values concerning our relationships with animals, such as tobacco offerings and asking for consent, are deemed subordinate or inferior to the values of the activist or the vegan. So it can provide a reason for vegans or vegetarians to feel they're superior to others based on their cultural beliefs. So there are obviously that's obviously a continuum from a colonial agenda that imposes values on people, even if our ways of knowing have been historically more ethical. So I just wanted to end, I guess, with suggesting some strategies for building a more united movement. Sometimes it is a strength of a movement for Indigenous peoples to take the lead. But as with the quinoa example, don't appropriate Indigenous knowledge. Obviously, there's been a increase in scientists and health professionals in the Western world kind of discovering that all the health benefits of quinoa. This was Indigenous knowledge, and we need to recognize the original caretakers of that plant and that enable us to have access to it today, and be more respectful of the preservation and resurgence of the Indigenous traditions that depend on those foods. Similarly, don't underestimate the worth and value of people's knowledge, even if it's not completely compatible with yours. Because you do want to be mindful of not furthering colonial violence on people. Yeah, so what I guess I suggest, the take home, try to become more aware of the colonial history where you live. It's often extremely complicated. Land acknowledgements in the area I currently live are very complicated because the Arawandaro were completely killed off. The Wendat Huron were then dispossessed, and currently there's 3 neighboring nations to the city. So this this can inform our daily lives and organizing in endless ways, and it can really be an empowering thing for other peoples, especially Indigenous peoples, for you to take that time to educate yourself, and it really can empower you as well to really recreate how you relate to the world around you and other people and animal beings by embodying these responsibilities. So I want to just thank you for listening today, and I look forward to your questions and comments. Animal rights movement protesting Native communities hunting and using animals. Have you seen any actions or strategies that have been successful in expressing solidarity among these groups? No, I haven't. That doesn't mean they don't exist. I'd be really interested in seeing or supporting that solidarity work happening. Basically, I grew up really close to Six Nations. I'm not Haudenosaunee, but we have a really good relationship with all the people there. My brother plays on the Six Nations lacrosse team, and so most recently the Short Hills hunt that Haudenosaunee citizens take part in. The Short Hills are really close to where I grew up. Was like very openly protested. There was articles flying all over the place, even with me not being there. I see them come up online. So I think that was really the motivation for me wanting to touch on that, is it hit so close to home. That being recognized, anyone that was participating in those protests, so I initiate a dialogue at all, but I think that is would be a really important dialogue to take, and I'm interested who asked this, Martina, if you any strategies that have been successful in doing that. Like I kind of touched on in the my presentation, what kind of bugged me about the debate was that the justification that was being presented in the mainstream for why these hunters should be allowed to participate in the hunt was population control. You know, like they're actually servicing the park, and they're servicing the ecosystem there by participating in the hunt, and that's just so in opposition to our traditional ways of being that it did really bug me that that's the way the justification was being framed, as opposed to saying, you know, denying these treaty rights and these Aboriginal rights as part of a colonial system that you know, dehumanizes and subjugates Indigenous peoples. So I guess that was that's all the commenting I really have on the debate. I have met people who are Indigenous, who are vegan, and who still wear regalia with animal parts in it, maybe earrings with you know, hide or something in them that have been gifted to them. For me personally, I don't eat meat in my daily life, but if I was visiting a community and someone had personally hunted an animal and made a stew out of it and offered me food, I believe it would be respectful to accept it. I think I have another question here. Okay. Are there any resources that have inspired you, or resources to continue to learn about this issue?
So just with that question, we're right at the end here. So I'm just wondering, with that question about resources, are you able to provide anything for people to keep up with yourself, and then anything with Stop Line 9 as well, or anything like that?
Oh yeah. Yeah. I don't have it off the top of my head. I'm wondering if I could make like a little list and then send it to you, Michael, and then.
Yeah, and you can post it on the Facebook event page too for people to learn more about it.
Yeah. I just wanted to really quickly, sorry. Factory farms, not consent. No, definitely not.
So thank you, Awâsis, for presenting. That was really great. It was great having you right at the end too to kind of wrap that up with with a lot of those just lessons about the medicine wheel and the circle. It's a good way to wrap up a lot of the conversations we've been having throughout the day. So thank you again.
No problem.